In this paper, we consider the challenge of supporting remote video interviews. We focus on interviews that are recorded, edited, and shown to audiences after the fact, as opposed to live interviews that are shown in real time. These kinds of interviews, which we refer to as video recorded remote interviews, are used across a range of contexts, including news broadcasting, documentary filmmaking, anthropology and ethnography, and some clinical and legal contexts. Video conferencing systems provide the basic technical infrastructure for conducting remote interviews, but recording good quality interviews is not particularly well supported by these kinds of tools. The well-known limitations of video conferencing, things like latency, fatigue, distractions, and poor lighting, sound and video quality, as well as underdeveloped protocols for conducting remote interviews, combine to undermine the overall quality of the interview for everyone. This includes not only the interviewees, but also the interviewers and audiences of the interview media. In this presentation, we describe a research through design study that sets out to explore the challenge of facilitating high-quality video-recorded remote interviews, framed around a documentary project produced during the pandemic. Our research question is simple: how can interactive systems better facilitate video-recorded remote interviews? As the world scrambled to adapt to new normals during the pandemic, this kind of remote interview became more common. Despite several limitations compared to studio interviews, for instance, which benefit from professional lighting and sound, the convenience and low overheads of interviewing remotely make it a valuable, albeit flawed, approach. A key limitation is that remote interview participants may not have the knowledge, skills, resources, or incentive to configure studio-quality recording environments at home. Drawing on insights from both remote and face-to-face interview methods, as well as professional standards of best practice, we set out to explore ways to improve both the technical quality of video-recorded remote interviews, as well as the experience of the remote interviewing process. Our research is framed within the context of a documentary project, which began in the UK during COVID lockdown. The work we describe here reflects the first 8 interviews of this project, and specifically we describe how we conducted these interviews remotely, using 4 experimental design interventions. The interview box, a prototype device that we designed and built to simultaneously support remote communication and capture professional quality video and audio. A pre-interview session that combined technical configuration with collaborative, co-creative activities inspired by the ways professional interviews interact with participants in face-to-face interviews. A novel interview technique, inspired by the interactive documentary Question Bridge, that incorporated questions from previous interviewees and facilitated interview participants to pose new questions for future participants.
Is there anything you think definitely isn't or can't be design research?
And a 2-headed interview, inspired by podcast formats, designed to create a more conversational tone in some parts of the interview. In this presentation, we focus on the interview box, but our paper includes reflections on all 4 interventions, so we invite you to read the full account there. The interview box is built around a portable flight case containing cameras, microphones, lights, and other apparatus designed to help maximise the technical quality of a remote interview. We developed the box using an iterative design process, drawing on insights from previous work and informed by our own experiences as video interviewers. The aim of the box was to serve as a functional prototype that would enable us to capture real interviews for our real documentary project, as well as being a research tool that would enable us to explore a research question. We sent the box to participants at home, supported them to get set up, and then used the box to conduct a video-recorded remote interview. To accompany the interview box, we produced an illustrated setup guide to help participants use the box safely and effectively. Some of the issues we identified and addressed through the design of the box include using 2 cameras, one to capture high bitrate 4K video and one to stream the video conference between interviewers and interviewees. Among other benefits, this allowed us to optimize the live stream by maximizing compression on one device, meanwhile optimizing recording quality by minimizing compression on the other device. Using 2 cameras also resolved the issue of the interview eyeline. Through adjacent placement of the cameras on an adjustable platform, we achieved a traditional long-sided interview with the subject at eye level with the camera. Not all of the issues we sought to resolve had integrated technical solutions. For example, while we were able to install 2 elements of a 3-point lighting setup in the box, we couldn't easily integrate a backlight, which is usually placed behind the interview subject to help them stand out from the background. Of the 24 design considerations listed in our paper, 7 did not have clear technical solutions. We therefore considered how we might adapt the interview process to address these issues. We resolved the backlight issue, for example, in dialogue with participants through a dedicated setup session to configure a light source behind them. Another issue we resolved in dialogue with participants related to lighting consistency. Sometimes it's necessary to combine different parts of an interview together, usually masked by cutaways during the editing. By keeping the lighting consistent, the impact of changing lighting conditions, such as those caused by changing weather, can be mitigated. We achieve this simply by asking participants to sit away from windows or skylights during setup, highlighting this advice in our illustrated guide. As well as reflecting on our design process, we captured feedback from interview participants via a survey. This revealed generally positive responses of feeling valued and heard, and appreciation for the overall experience of the interview. It also revealed some criticisms, including a shared feeling that the setup was a faff. Overall, the interview box worked well, and we captured 8 high-quality interviews using our 2-camera approach and a 3-point lighting setup. Although it was seen as a faff, the pre-interview setup broke the ice and allowed us to build rapport and nurture a shared sense of common purpose with our participants. Our question bridge ideas were also well received, and this has led to an ongoing follow-up project, which you can read about as a footnote in the paper. However, we encountered a number of issues, from failed recordings to wandering autofocus, to unintentional reflections and other quirks that more streamlined monitoring would have made easier to spot. We also encountered logistical issues such as restrictions on posting lithium-ion batteries in the UK, which meant that we had to deliver the boxes manually. Participants didn't always see the value of improving the quality of the interview media. Taking responsibility for the quality of the recording is usually the interviewer's job, but the idea of nurturing a shared sense of ownership was well received, so more work is needed to communicate the value of the faff with the interview subjects. We reflect on both what went well and what went less well in greater detail in the paper. So how can interactive systems better facilitate remote video recorded interviews? With existing video conferencing tools, even some of the basic traditions of interviewing, like consistent lighting, are surprisingly difficult to achieve. Of course, it isn't necessary to adopt these traditions, but unintentionally breaking the rules can be confusing for audiences. If we can design systems that reincorporate the basic tenets of good practice from in-person interviews, it will be more obvious when rules are broken intentionally, and the creative possibilities for remote interviews will become clearer. For example, in traditional interviews, backlights are used to separate interview subjects from their backgrounds, but it's also common practice to configure meaningful backgrounds for interview subjects. A welcome evolution of subtraction map backgrounds would be to find new and potentially more meaningful ways to help interview subjects stand out. The long-sided interview is another example of an established practice that could be leveraged to improve remote interviews. This involves fixing the eye line so that participants are at the same level as the camera and looking either straight at the camera or slightly to the side. If something like an interview box is to be developed further, certain features should be integrated more elegantly. This includes autofocus, dynamic reframing, and audiovisual monitoring, among other things. Interviews are defined as much by the interactions between interviewers and interviewees as the content of the interview, so it's worth supporting trust between these parties both before, during, and after the interview. One way of achieving this is via a setup session with input from both parties. This draws on established interview techniques and has the added benefit of incorporating some necessary technical setup. However, it needs to be managed carefully and sensitively. It's important to remember that there are many reasons why a remote interview might take place, and some of these reasons could call for specific sensitivity to the context. It may be vital to preserve anonymity, for instance, or it might be important to consider the aesthetic of the box. If working with children, it might be necessary to involve a parent or guardian. We hope that future work on remote interviews will confront these issues in more depth. As it stands, the contribution of this work falls into 2 main categories. Firstly, we believe our account of our design process offers a rich technical resource for designers working to support video-recorded remote interviews. We list 24 design considerations that could be developed into more nuanced or specialised iterations of the interview box idea, and we hope that our work provides a useful stimulus and starting point for others in this space. Secondly, we offer reflections on the broader challenges of designing for virtual online communication. As the potential for new forms of online interactions expand, we hope that this work demonstrates the tight connections between technical and social interaction concerns and the importance of considering the quality of the process alongside the quality of any media outputs.